There's a lot of lost films in the world of horror. In fact, I think the horror genre might just have the most lost films out there. Just movies that go into legend. Some because they were destroyed permanently, especially like in the early, like 20s and 30s and stuff. We'll never see them. And if we do, everybody's gonna be like, "Holy shit!" And then they'll see it and they'll be like, "Yeah, that wasn't what I expected."
I think the difference is that with horror, people are interested. I'm sure there's plenty of lost films out there that are straight fundidos, and no one gives a freaking ass about them.
Yeah, for real, dude. There's just something about the mystique of horror plus the mystique of a lost film that like it really makes you go. That's right, you turn into a crone. But speaking of people turning into crones, we watched a movie whilst having Crohn's disease. That's right, we just shit ourselves.
It's crippling, dude.
No, man, look, this movie, I remember, I don't know if you were there with us. I think you were. Should have been. At least one of the times. But I remember the trailer to this movie being in front of the mist and me being like, whoa. Mental note. When you see a trailer you want to see, you're like, mental note, gotta see this. And then nothing happened. And I don't know, a year or two later, I remember, I was like, hey, whatever happened to that movie? So a little research. And then it's like, oh, it didn't come out. It got shelved. That's interesting. And then maybe a year or so later, being like, well, I guess I'll just look for it the way we do whenever we don't have money. Hashtag super legal. And lo and behold, I found it there. And that's how I first encountered this movie. And in the meantime, though, like the legend behind this movie grew, it was almost like an inadvertent campaign for the movie. Of course, theories happen with movies like this that come and go about whether that was all intentional or not. Well, given the tremendous amount of money lost, no, it was not intentional. This movie was actually made independently and did do the circuit runs as far as festivals go, and was received. I want to say well, but that well by horror well. Obviously, there was rumors of people being upset by the content matter. Whether those are true or not, I don't know. But it's one of those things that kind of became part of the air of mystery around this particular piece. But it did make the runs in the circuit. And it was bought by MGM, who then proceeded to do nothing with it. And I think what ultimately really happened is...
MGM stands for Mega Gay Mechos.
And indeed they were that, because they never released this into the public. Which honestly, I think they should have taken advantage of it, I don't know the reasoning, and they've never come out to say what the reasoning is, as far as I'm aware. And I try to look into it. The directors behind this movie have never really spoken as to what happened there, but one can only assume that, as is the case with some movies sometimes, the studio just was like, nah, not gonna release it. It didn't cost us enough for us to give a shit, so we just shelve it. And there it remained. And then one day, out of the fucking blue, this thing drops into VOD, and a batch of people watch it.
Very old dingalings.
Yeah. Oh, dude, they were all wrinkly and shit. No, but this thing dropped into VOD, give or take, like 5 years ago or so, and it dropped, and people were like, "Whoa, this thing's on!" All of a sudden, and there was a spat of people watching it, and then it got swept away. So that only added to the mystique for the people that didn't see it. The rumblings of what the fuck's going on with this fucking thing? Why did they even buy it? I don't know. I can only assume it was cheap enough for them not to give a shit. Mm-hmm. The point is, eventually it did get released. Scream Factory, put out their feelers, and they released the Poughkeepsie tapes, a movie that now you can actually buy and watch, and make your own mind up about. I don't know what the general reception is to this movie. I can only go off of what I've heard certain people talk, and it seems to be very divisive. People either are freaked out by it, the atmosphere it provides, and or they hate it, and the reasons for that vary. But I see a lot of people being like adverse to the nature of what's being depicted. with a smaller contingent being like, I hate it because of X technical reason or whatever, you know. So I don't know where you sit. Had you heard about this movie? Were you there when the trailer? No. Okay, well, I don't know. Had you seen it before?
Nah. Although, interestingly enough, this apparently is the root of that one clip that was being used in all those creepy videos.
Yeah, if you've seen tons of like, you know, these deep web meme style videos or just these compilations of creepy imagery, you're bound to have seen a particular snippet from this movie involving a mask and a weird crawling person.
A little homie stretching out.
So yeah, man, that's where that came from. Which only, by the way, added to its mystique because there is kind of like a deep web vibe to some of the material here. But anyway, if you're not familiar with the Poughkeepsie tapes or what it's all about, it is a documentary style film. And spoiler, if you didn't know this, I know there's people that somehow still think this is real. I don't know how, but anyway, it's not real. It's a faux documentary made, under the illusion that it's real. But anyway, it's about these mysterious tapes that show up, that crop up after a serial killer is nearly caught, question mark.
Yeah.
But, and it's a voluminous amount of tapes that allow the people, and including the viewer, to take a peek behind the veil, if you will, of the mind of the serial killer. The serial killer here being kind of like a patchwork of various serial killers that we're familiar with. But anyway, that's what the Poughkeepsie tapes are. It is presented in the form of kind of like a news magazine style program / true crime documentary interspersed with snippets of the supposed footage. So it kind of walks this line between a faux documentary and the found footage genre, which, is not as common as just straight up found footage. So there's that. There's something about a movie that lays out the condition of pseudo-reality that seems to piss people off. Especially when it comes to found footage, the idea is a contingent of people seem to have a hard time believing that the camera would be in some position at all times. I think this movie does a really good job of showing the camera in natural movement, and when it is not in natural movement, it's because of the serial killer's proclivities, which are, obviously he's recording his own shit for his own pleasure or whatever. So I think the material and the way it's presented allow for that, allow the viewer to steep into the pseudo-realism of it on top of the way it's presented as this documentary format. So I think, at least in my experience with people that have talked about it, there's less hatred from the people that generally tend to hate found footage films because it is kind of a different animal. Now, we don't hate found footage here, on the channel. If it's done right, obviously. If it's done like shit, then we'll kick it to the curb. But what did you think about the gimmick here and how it was utilized?
I do think that they were pretty aware of the fact that people cry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty early on, they're like, nah, homie, this is why.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good.
Yeah. The Dowdle brothers, I'm becoming a pretty big fan of their work. I think they're still relatively unsung. If anything, they should be getting blowjobs on the daily from M. Night Shyamalan. Because remember that time when everybody hated M. Night? They directed a movie for him called Devil, which, kind of reminded people that M. Night was a guy that they once gave a shit about. But the Dowdle brothers have gone on to basically make their imprint in this kind of found footage, pseudo-realistic format with movies like the remake of the Spanish horror film Wreck, Quarantine, and one of our favorites, As Above, So Below. They've kind of mastered this arena in a landscape that is just awash with tons of found footage, most of which is not very effective.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
Because throughout watching this, obviously not all of it, but a good part of it, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
is basically what creep would be if it didn't suck mass dinghies.
Yeah, dude, right?
I was actually watching. I was like, it's just Creep, only not shit.
Yeah, Creep, and we realized it was trying to be tongue in cheek and all that shit. But boy, did we hate Creep. Creep is a fucking failure if I've ever seen one. So yeah, this is like taking the material seriously and actually effectively, in my opinion. And I gotta say, it does. It's kind of uncomfortable to watch because we're used to horror movies kind of putting a shade of like palatability behind the killers, you know. You may, and I don't even have to explain that. Most horror fans are like, hell yeah, Freddy's cool or Jason's cool. And granted, in those movies, generally speaking, the good guy character sucked major donkey balls. So, I mean, yeah, I guess by default, Freddy would be cooler or whatever. But in a lot of movies, I mean, that's not the point. You're not supposed to cheer for the bad guy. But even in those movies, there's kind of like a shade of like, that's pretty neat. If you distance yourself, if there's a disconnect from reality. This movie kind of makes it uncomfortable for you to ever say that. And if you do, what kind of creep are you here?
Creep?
Definitely not that type. But yeah, the killer here is unflinchingly an awful person, a necrophile, a pedophile, all kinds of shit that you could never feasibly want to root for.
Edgelord.
Definite edgelord,
I think that's the biggest crime he committed, being a freaking hardcore edgelord.
That was Jimmy Savile's greatest crime.
Damn, homie.
Damn, homie, that guy.
That guy looked like a demon.
Yeah, for real, man. Plus tracksuits. Anyway, this guy doesn't wear tracksuits, but he does wear a little outfit.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny that we're watching this. We've talked about this before on our main channel, how masks allow you to do certain things that you wouldn't normally do, which is part of the reason we wear masks. We can open up a little more and be a little bit more idiotic and theatrical on our main channel.
It allows me to be straight for once.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. I don't want you like grabbing my nuts mid video.
Yeah, I like straight up power slides to your wiener and start making like a seal, dude.
Ah, dude.
It's not good.
I got bruises on my crotch. But no, but it's true, man. We've experienced this before. We've talked about on the main channel about how we used to wear a wrestling mask and go out there, and it was just somehow like we could do different things, It was easier to interact with people. We could be wilder and crazier, in social situations. So it taps into that with this guy, and we never really get a full picture of the width and breadth of his psychology. Much more, we just get these disturbing peeks into his rise as a serial killer, and how, for lack of better words, brilliant he is at it. And at the same time, I think the most disturbing aspect is the particular victimization of a character named Cheryl Dempsey, which is kind of how we see the long-term effects of somebody being victimized by somebody like this. And there, I think, is the linchpin to the movie, that's where the most unsettling elements come from. Like, if Joker and Harley were a real thing, this is what it kind of would be, not this crown prince of crime. It's pretty unnerving. On top of that, the imagery is pretty unnerving too. Give me something about this film, man, that either you didn't like or liked. Give it to me.
I do feel I'm gonna put on my nitpicking porcupine suit. That's a good one.
What?
I was trying to make a
porcupine suit now.
Yeah, dude. I pick out the quills and start nitpicking. It's bad.
Okay.
It's admittedly a very nitpicky thing.
All right.
But I do feel that, and I understand why they did it. Otherwise, it would be pretty unwatchable.
Right.
I do feel that the video stuff doesn't look convincing. It's very obviously like a fake filter, and it's in widescreen. Again, I understand why, and you need to make it viewable without you wanting to die, because cameras back then looked like shit, But it's a very nitpicky thing that I could totally see some people being like, it breaks the immersion because of this. So I just wanted to point it out. Does it break the immersion? I do think that there is a disconnect between, this is not going on. and the fact that it looks so high quality or so fake low quality, you could kind of like, it lets you break that immersion factor. But ultimately, I found it to be kind of a good thing, because otherwise I would be like, man, this is hard to watch.
Kind of like a Manhunt 2, the video game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm going to go on the opposite of you and say that I didn't find the application of certain... Again, you're familiar with VHS. It fucking sucked balls. Now, I will say that the widescreen thing's kind of a fucking thing, although there were widescreen VHS recorders back then. But at the same time, I didn't find the filter.
It is quite good, the filter. I've seen way worse.
This is not... I don't want people to get the impression that it's like that filter that everybody uses in their fucking shitty, like spooky videos.
Yeah, like the one we used on Clowns on Clowns.
Yeah, that was bad. But but no, it's professionally applied.
Yeah, it looks good, and then there's like interesting uses of warp, and
it's a good way to, one, show the age of the videotapes, and two, obscure the harder to I guess process material in this, and possibly curb a harder rating,
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, it has the effect of being kind of like, well, it adds a level where your mind does a little bit of the work too, so you add more to it than is there, so it kind of like really works for me. So yeah, but I get you're saying it in a nitpicky fashion. But yeah. But anyway, what else you want to add? I got a nitpick for you, and maybe you'll agree or not. Since this is presented in a faux documentary style, we get a variety of people that talking heads here and there, from FBI profilers, to people that knew victims, etc.
To just some random homie.
Yeah, random homie, whatever. So if you've ever seen true crime, material, you know that people act a certain way in front of the cameras. Sometimes they're very natural in front of the cameras. Sometimes they're very stiff in front of the cameras. Sometimes, you can see they're thinking about things in front. And I think this movie does a really good job of presenting, that wide variety of deliveries.
Yeah, there's especially one cop who thinks he's all badass clearly, and you're just like, freaking.
Now, I've heard some people be critical, like, oh, they can't act. But I mean, if you watch true crime documentaries, that's people behave differently in front of the camera. Now, my nitpick, where is it then? If I've just praised that, my nitpick is one fucking guy with one fucking scene, and it's really short. And for some reason, I remember this guy having more scenes. Now, I will say this. The version that I saw that I had to download back in the early days was a rough cut version. So maybe the guy did have more scenes. And, this final version, maybe maybe I was so annoyed with him then that I remember him being in more scenes. But in this version, if it's the same, then my memory fooled me. But he just has one scene, and it's a guy. Movies calling experts. The documentaries calling experts and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
There's a guy.
Yeah.
That's quote unquote a dismemberment expert.
Yeah. That dude was way too happy.
Yeah. First of all, and again, there's people that act a certain way, but he was a shit actor for what emotion and style he was trying to put across. And I'm sure there are dismemberment.
Yeah.
There's blood spatter experts and shit like that. But it just sounds like fake dismemberment expert. And then on top of that, he's wearing a lab coat. And he's in front of
saws.
A table of saws and knives. That one guy, I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, fuck this guy.
That dude was insanely happy. And like you said, people act kind of weird. But you could see him in his face. You could see him be like, oh, I'm supposed to be playing it this way. And it was a visual roller coaster in his face of moods.
Because the character was supposed to be an enthusiastic about his, this scenario thing. Yeah. But then he realizes as he's talking, oh shit, this is some fucked up shit I'm talking about. And now I'm disturbed. That was the range of emotions he was supposed to go through.
But it kept going up and down.
Yeah, but now, and then imagine that only done shittily by somebody, and that's that guy. But it's such a brief scene, and thankfully the second time it wasn't so bad. But the first time I was like, this fucking guy, I remember writing a review back then and being like, I love this movie, but this guy needs to die. Like, they need to, like, cut him out immediately. But anyway, that's my fucking nitpick with this damn thing. Like, this fucking guy sucks major dinglings. That being said, the movie is still presented in a way where it's supposed to, you know, give the illusion of reality. There's no credits that are like this guy's acting as this guy, or it's just people credited as the characters they're playing. You know, the whole setup is kept that way. And so let's talk about other movies that are disturbing in this kind of realm. You know, of the serial killer realm. And I'm kind of loath to call serial killer movies horror movies. They're horrible in the sense that, you know, that shit's legit for real happens, you know, and the circumstances are horrifying, but I'm loath to lump them in with horror films unless they're so camp over the top that they become horror films. So, but there are movies that are generally stuck in that category. Like, a good example is Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, a movie that I found profoundly disturbing. I'm sure you did too, unless you're like all about that Henry or something.
I mean, I haven't seen him forever, but I remember being like, damn, homie.
Yeah.
I'm 3 and you're showing me this?
Henry is a particularly, again, disturbing insight into the mind of a serial killer. And it's done in this kind of like very close to like cinema verite style, you know. There's a grittiness to it, if you will. And it's not a fun movie to watch. It's not a movie where you're like, yeah, this is cool. And you forget the fact that, you know, you're watching something. No, it's a disturbing movie to watch. Now, I bring that one up because it's an unsettling insight into the mind of a person that we know was a real serial killer. However, we also know that the real Henry Lee Lucas lied a lot. And a lot of the killings that he attributed to himself, we now know he was not responsible for. Between him and Otis O'Toole, they made up like a fabricated mythological version of their serial killing exploits. So it's a movie that remains disturbing despite real life facts now contradicting it quite a bit. And that's what this movie achieves. It remains disturbing despite the fact that we know inherently that none of this happened. You know, and that's quite the achievement because, and I'll cite a movie I recently watched called Fury of the Demon, which granted is not about a serial killer, but it's supposed to create this illusion of a real lost film, coincidentally, that drove people mad. You know, and it fails miserably on every level to create that illusion. It's not an immersive experience. It's just it's a documentary sort, and it could have been so good had it managed to create that illusion. And don't get me wrong, the people, the talking heads, all are very convincing. It's just the movie never quite gets there. This one gets there, and I think stays there, in my opinion. You know, and basing myself on the reactions from people that have seen it, even the ones that don't like it, there's things in this movie that stick in their mind permanently, or at least kind of like stain it a little bit, that they do refer to quite often. So there's something to be said about that, you know, about the effectiveness of that. But anyway, just a thought. Give me something, man, good or bad.
I do think, just to add my thoughts to that, I do think that, for me at least, there was a very big separation in knowing that it was a movie. But I could acknowledge that they did a good job, you know, putting it together. You know? So, despite it being very obvious, I mean, like, you know it's a movie going in, you can, even if you know that, you can still appreciate the lengths they went to try to make it feel real. Example being, there's a lot of weird, almost corny camera work that at first you're gonna be like, that's weird, why is there Dutch angles all of a sudden? But if you've seen these kind of shows and movies, you'd know that they do that stuff.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a cool extra step that they went to even bring in kind of like the weirder,
tropes.
Like kind of lowbrow, corny tropes, like scoring certain things a certain way.
Yeah.
The reenactments that the people don't look anything like the actual people.
Yeah.
You know, and like these weird little Dutch angle shit and all that stuff. So it is neat that they went the extra mile to do that.
What I specifically like a lot along those lines is, in doing that, they create a form of expectation for what's to come. You know, and there's almost like there's a point in this movie where if you're so used to that type of program, it feels like an anticlimactic end. But of course, the movie goes beyond that. And they played into those expectations, given the format, pretty well. Which means that when we get this extra, in the standard horror movie, it'd be the villain comes back for one final thing, you know? Here it's played off as this kind of like chess move that really fucking sucks.
Yeah.
You know, whereas normally in a horror movie, because we want sequels, we'd be like, oh yeah, we get that last, you know, yeah, the good guys survive and we're happy for them, but we get that last wink that says, oh shit, they're gonna be part 2, dude. Here it's more like, damn, homies, dude, you know, they didn't even touch this guy. And it's not a moment of celebration or anything like that. So it plays into the tropes of the true crime, you know, documentary genre, if you will, while at the same time playing quite effectively what we've come to expect with a horror film. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room besides us, and that is, of course, the kind of aforementioned linchpin to this whole thing, and it's the character of Cheryl, who is a kind of like the thread that stayed with this character, with the serial killer character, for the good length of the movie. You know, she's a person that he kidnaps and kind of keeps, and you know, there's something of a Stockholm syndrome that is fostered between he and her, or between she and him, I should say, and I mean, at least in my opinion, she becomes the most unsettling part of this narrative, and at the same time, it's a person you barely see beyond some disturbing shots. What did you think of this character and how she was, you know, kind of presented? I know some people. I'll say that I asked it that way because I say some people find it really offensive or misogynistic the way she's presented, but I think, before you state yours, I think that's kind of like a rough criticism to lay out there given the nature of the film. But anyway, what'd you think about the character, the portrayal, etc.?
I think it's like the most tragic thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is another tragic moment, which is kind of what you mentioned earlier, which I could see being really like, damn it, for some people.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I was like, yeah. Well, not really, yeah, but you know, it's an interesting twist.
Mm-hmm.
So I was along for the ride. But this was the actual kind of like, damn, homie moment for me. And it's interesting because in the last scene with her, it's basically the most you've seen her like speak to the camera and stuff. But that little bit, just because of what you've seen before, is like, damn, homie.
Yeah.
So I think it's a kind of important character to put in there because it shows you that this is not supposed to be like a cool Freddy Krueger guy.
Yes.
It's supposed to be like a, damn, homie, this guy licks mass dinghies.
And I think you hit the nail right on the head. That's why I disagree with the people that are like, this is just a movie for misogynistic voyeurs that want. And yes, don't get me wrong, horror and true crime communities are filled with people that just want to put themselves in the head of somebody that's twisted. They're all over the place. It's inevitable. However, I think that's kind of why this movie, it's going to attract those people anyway, but I think that's what separates this movie. One, they don't glorify that killer, and two, introducing this character is, yes, she goes through something incredibly dehumanizing, but if you are along for that ride, for her to see that and enjoy that, then you're fucked.
Yeah.
You're fucked. You know what I'm saying? You're fucked in the head. There's no way you can cheer for this guy seeing her as this constant thread, because you gotta keep in mind the movie presents the movie lays out its hand of cards early on by going, check out these tapes. And there's, as aforementioned, voluminous amounts of them, hundreds upon hundreds of tapes. And they point out that only a small fraction, a third of them, are all the other people he killed. Yeah. But this massive other end of this fucking table of tapes is all chronicling her, and we just see glimpses of that.
Yeah,
they're fucked up glimpses.
I think that's kind of an interesting thing, is that though she is the thing that you see the most of, I think hers are like somewhat tame, because she doesn't get killed basically.
Yeah.
But then at the end, when they show her condition, it becomes really obvious that there's a lot of shit they haven't shown, and it's a lot worse,
Yeah, and then
you could think of.
Yeah, exactly, and you get to see part of that conditioning psychologically, and that's kind of more terrifying than any gore or grue that you could have shown, And I'll bring up another found footage style and very infamous set of movies. They're called the August Underground movies, which I don't recommend you watch. They were actually made by a guy that's a former cohort of Tom Savini that had his own school of special effects, and he realized that a bunch of the people coming into his school were not only horror fans, but kind of like these people that I mentioned that are not watching horror for quote unquote the right reasons. They instead revel in the evil rather than cheering for the good guy or wanting evil to be stamped out. They just revel in the decadence of it. And he was kind of like, this kind of sucks, because those same people were adulating serial killers in real life, which of course, it's not a area you want to cross over to, So he went out and made a set of what can only be described as a facsimile of a serial killer's exploits being recorded on videotape, just like the killer here.
A creep.
But there was no story to these, basically. It was just, what if a serial killer filmed their shit? And that's literally all a serial killer would film, their shit. And then what if somebody found them? And he would, instead of distributing these movies, eventually he did, but he would literally leave tapes lying around. And then there was kind of a mystique that came out of that. But they're very incredibly disturbing movies to watch, if you won't even want to call them movies, because his point was made. Like, if you like this as, like, is this something you revel in, then you're fucked. You know what I'm saying? You're fucked in the head. And this is kind of where this movie resides, it makes that very distinct point. And I think the key to that is this character of Cheryl. So yes, the character is treated like garbage. Her psyche is curbed and destroyed, basically, and changed. The landscape of her mind is completely changed. And there is a statement to be said there, oftentimes in horror, our heroine is a heroine. There's rarely a hero, a male hero. And where do we draw that line from this is somebody we cheer for to this is somebody we're cheering for to see afflicted? It's kind of like a twisted relationship we have with femininity and horror, and it's something that this movie kind of forces you to kind of watch in a really fucked up way. I'm telling you, that ending is with her character is, there's so little said, but what is said just cements what has happened to her.
Yeah.
And then there's an unspoken bit, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I won't ruin it here. There's an unspoken bit that's just a physical motion that reveals something where you really, really, truly get a grasp of her experience, and it's fucking, it's heartbreaking. It sucks. But this movie does that incredibly well, and kudos to that. But anyway, anything you want to add, or extrapolate on before we give our final thoughts on this little sucker here?
Yeah, it needed a guy in a wolf mask.
Man, creep sucks. It's not good.
Your creep hate is legendary.
It's the worst,
even
man.
in hell.
Yeah, it would be.
I could see this being like hella freaking disturbing to someone that doesn't know it's a movie, because it is presented like a documentary, and they go the extra steps to be like, hey, this is hella documentary. Though really, if you know anything about those kind of movies, you know they wouldn't show you these tapes or that much of these tapes. But I could see this being like super disturbing for someone like that, or someone who can suspend their disbelief to that point. That being said, doesn't mean it's not effective to hardened, or not even hardened, just loser ass horror fiends like us. Because there is several, at least for me, there was that one scene that was like, damn, homie.
Yeah.
For you, there's two, at least. So yeah, it's cool, man. I like it. It's a good movie. Also, this is a cool guy.
No, I'm gonna, kind of like jump on that. Oh, the wagon you just threw out there. It's red, by the way. But no, look, kind of with Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Painting that wagon, homeboy.
No,
but anyway, look, I think there is a predisposition from a lot of horror fans to cross their arms and look at horror movies and go, I'm not scared. Get over it, homeboy or homegirl. Get over it. As seasoned horror fans, yes, stuff is not spooky to us anymore. But that just means you're failing to watch a movie in a completely different way that allow you to watch a movie. You're still stuck in that preteen mentality where you're like, oh, I'm gonna be spooked out.
Yeah.
No, that means you're not getting into the mind of the characters. That means you're not putting yourself in the shoes of the people. The spooks are different as you get older. The spooks and the chills come from you realizing the implications of things. If this was you, holy shit, this would be terrifying. If you can see how someone's mind is shattered and not empathize with that, then something's wrong with you, or you're not watching something in the correct way. Now, of course, if the movie's not done right, well, then obviously that's a whole nother fucking bag of sticks. But, like a movie like Room, which is not even a horror movie, is fucking horrifying because of what's going on with these characters. And that's kind of where the unsettling nature of this come from. That you could see yourself seeing this and then see through the mind and eyes of these people and be like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, and a movie like The Room is horrifying just because it sucks.
Oh, yeah. Please, I meant Room, not The Room. Yeah. Stinky, The Room is.
Better make that clear.
Yes, very clear.
People are going to think you're scared of The Room.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of scared of watching it.
Yeah, dude, it's bad.
It's not good. Super boring. Yeah. But in that good way. But anyway.
How is that possible, man?
I don't know, but it is. But this is not super boring, but it is good. Let's give this a final rating on a scale of 1 to 10. Again, relative to films of its type, which, in all honesty, there's not a lot of them. So we can give it both on the found footage faux documentary scale, 1 to 10, and then on the more wider horror scale. And give it to me on any final thoughts you may have.
When was this movie came out?
2008, 7, somewhere around there.
Interesting. So I'm gonna give it I'm gonna even give it some more props. Crops?
You're gonna give some gore?
Yeah, dude. I'm gonna give more props because I feel like this movie is ahead of its time. It's very much, it plays into the horror YouTube fans,
Yeah.
So if you like those kind of channels and shit like that, I think you would like this movie.
Yeah.
Because it is it's laid out that way.
Your creepypasta and all that stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting that it was made before that was even a thing, really. So I'll give it like
on the found footage faux documentary scale, you give it a.
I'll give it like a 9.
All right, and on the general horror scale, horror is not a good.
I'll give it an 8.
All right.
Yeah, I feel like I have to give it a higher praise because there's so few of those horror documentaries.
Yeah. I think this movie achieved something that very few, films in this vein do, It's a hard... Found footage may seem like the thing to do when you don't have money And, you know, that's kind of how it's disregarded and cast aside by a lot of people. Oh, I don't have money. I could make that. But really, to make an effective one is possibly the hardest thing you can do. And I think the Dowdle brothers, as aforementioned, don't get the credit they deserve for doing what they do some of the times. They've made some pretty damn good entries into the subgenre that stand out.
Especially when with found films, it's usually something supernatural or some ghost.
Yeah. To step outside of that comfort zone itself was kind of like a thing. I think there's some incredibly effective sequences in this. I think the villain is detestable in every which way, and yet at the same time somebody that kind of leaves you, you know, in this mind space where you realize your place in the world. You know, they present a factoid at the beginning of this movie about the state of serial killers and active serial killers that kind of puts things in frame for you, you know. And I believe those numbers are actually larger, if I remember correctly, you know, in terms of how many active serial killers there are. But anyway, it walks this line that if you're familiar with these two genres, be it true crime or horror, where you can kind of, you know, understand the severity of certain things. But ultimately, I think it's a disturbing fucking peek into something that is shockingly common in America for, you know, the type of crime it is, versus everywhere else in the fucking world. So for that reason, all that we've talked about up to this point, I have to give it its props. On the found footage scale, I'll give it a 9.5. I'm taking 0.5 out because that fucking dismemberment guy stink fast. Yeah, if you have somebody that's really into true crime documentaries and stuff like that,
like, dude, this is real.
Yeah, well, don't even say that. Just be like, oh, you gotta see this one, and you know, hopefully they don't know about it, which a lot of people still kind of don't. And just watch it and see how, you know, it affects them or whatever, you know. I like you went into watching this knowing, you know, what it was, and it still unsettled me, and it was, you know, it's just that effective. But anyway, on the normal horror scale, yeah, I'll give it like a 8.5. You know,
0.5 again because of that guy.
The guy, dude. But anyway, let us know what you think of the Poughkeepsie tapes if you haven't seen them. Now there's no excuse not to see them. I'm sure they're uploaded constantly now, because there's an actual copy out there. Or get the little.
Or just watch that little GIF.
Just watch that one GIF that apparently gives people a heap. Oh no! I just realized something. The inner insert
is that guy.
It's the fucking dismemberment expert guy.
I wonder if that guy's like something.
You know, he might be, man. Damn, homie.
Because why the hell would they put him in the freaking insert?
Let me find out he's one of the Dowdle brothers.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a thing I discovered.
That's the guy.
So let us know what you think of the Poughkeepsie tapes, that is.
Oh.
And hit like, share, subscribe, and the notification buttons. Because, you know, we're out.